Ladies and gentlemen, I have on the end of the phone a gentleman by the name of Nick Pendleton, who is one of the co-authors, I think, of a book about the Marquee. And as it says underneath, the story of the world's greatest music venue. Hello, Nick. How you doing?
Hi, very good, thank you. Co-authors and also son of Harold Pendleton, the founder of the Marquee and Reading Festival. So I guess it's a personal story as well as a story about the history of music, London and Soho.
I was going to say that because your dad, Harold, and your mum started it in 1958 as a jazz club, didn't they?
Yeah, Lee, that's right. I mean, a world away, really. I mean, when I try and put myself in my dad's shoes, he born and brought up just after the effects of the war, and that was First World War, and lived through Second World War, the rationing. Came down to London as a 24-year-old to seek his sort of fame and fortune. Initially, to work in the city. Fell in love with jazz, and I think London and certainly Soho at the time must have been so different to the rest of society. And who would have thought in 10 years it would be almost the cultural centre of the world with swinging London?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the amount of bands that have launched themselves there and have had possibly their first live experience in a popular venue. The list is incredible, isn't it?
Well, I just jotted down a few names, and sorry, it sounds a bit boring going through them. But what I wanted to tell the story of is, I guess, more than my own parents' history, is how a lot of these bands that we thought were destined for fame, and I don't know about you, but whenever I sort of read books about them or the documentaries, they always miss out the interesting bit about, well, how did they meet each other? How did they practice their art? How did they get signed? And that fuzzy front end, if you like, because, just all the tours and the fame is pretty similar across all of these bands, but It's fascinating to understand, how they formed and how they got started. And actually, the Marquee story, most interestingly, is a lot of the artists actually went as punters first. They went in the crowd and got inspired by seeing other people, and that inspired them to, pick up an instrument or learn how to play. So I find all that, really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I'm just looking at things like the Rolling Stones. Well, of course, the late Charlie Watts, he was a jazz drummer, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the Stones famously played their first ever gig at the Marquee, and actually, on the phone to my mum, we also had a newspaper called Jazz News, which carried the adverts for the concerts at the Marquee, and had to make up on the spot a name for the band. And there was a Muddy Waters record lying on the floor, and just picked a song from that, and that's how the Rolling Stones got their name. So yeah, first ever gig. At that time, Charlie Watts hadn't joined, but he was a drummer in the band they were replacing that day, because Blues Incorporated, which is the UK's sort of first blues band with Alexis Corner and Cyril Davis, had Charlie Watts as the drummer. He got replaced by someone else equally famous, Ginger Baker, and at the time he was playing with sort of three bands, and then eventually, actually at the Marquee, he got persuaded to throw his lot in with the Stones. Probably quite a wise decision, really.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, though.
Not a bad decision. But yeah, his first love was jazz, as you rightly said, was my dad's, and it was really jazz that led. Well, jazz was seen as bohemian at the time, back when I said that Dad arrived in London, and then he managed the Chris Barber band, which created this craze called skiffle, which nearly all the rock bands started off as skiffle bands, because it created a movement where you could almost do a do-it-yourself band. So people could pick up instruments and have a go. Then Chris and Dad fought tooth and nail to bring over some of those great bluesmen that ironically, the UK English Musicians Union wouldn't allow them to come over. So fought hard to bring over Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williamson, and these guys came over to the UK, pretty much unknown in the US, came over to the UK, amazingly with electric guitars, shock and horror to the country blues fans over in the UK, and electrified a generation. And of course, that then created a movement that they became famous back in the US. And then we had the British invasion, where the Stones, the Yardbirds, the Who, etc., all of who again started the Marquee, went back to the States. So it's a moment in time.
The bands that were playing there, because of what they were playing and how they were playing, and at this time you've got to remember, I guess, that a lot of these bands were unsigned and to a certain extent unknown. Did you find you got a lot of sort of pluggers, managers, and people like that, talent spotters, coming down to see who have they got on this week, sort of thing?
Well, yeah, that's I guess why the club, it's not just our opinion. It's the world's most influential music venue. Q Magazine did a top 10. Interestingly, 5 of those venues are based in London, some in New York and Tokyo, etc. And number 1 of the list was the Marquee. Melody Maker named it the most important venue in the world, and that was because it was in a unique place and time. So, in the middle of Soho, which was the heart of swinging London, you had all of the musical papers, all the management agencies, of course the film companies were based there. So effectively, why the Marquee was so important for people to play wasn't because it was particularly glamorous, it's because the audience there were the people that could make you a star. They could sign you, they could write about you, and you could meet fellow band members there. So it was almost a melting pot where you could, if you were good enough, you could get lucky.
It's incredible, isn't it, how that club transformed itself, let's call it that, from being a jazz club to going through rock, to going through blues, to going through modern music. It lived the music that was going on in the world, didn't it, really?
Well, this is why it stands out from some of the other clubs, because it went with the times, and I guess it went for 30 years, and I guess you can only keep going for 30 years if you do move with the times, and pretty much in the late 60s, there was a new musical movement every week. I mean, my dad still remained a passionate traditional jazz fan, but he was smart enough. Famously, he would always ask the cloakroom people that were working there, saying, how did the band go down tonight? What were they talking about? And keep your ear to the ground and try and book what's new. So, yeah, you went from the Stones and the Yardbirds, who famously recorded their first live album there on the opening night of when the Marquee moved to Wardour Street, obviously with Eric Clapton on guitar, Manfred Mann, to the Who, that famously played 22 nights, 22 weeks in a row as a residency. Wow. And at the start they were unknowns, and by the end, they had that famous poster. Everyone came to see what they were going to destroy in terms of their instruments. And by the end, they had a records released and appeared on TV. You had Pink Floyd played their first ever gig there. Wow. You had David Bowie, bizarrely, who it took 8 years. First came as a fan. He had 8 incarnations of different bands playing there, and of course initially as David Jones, and then finally met the manager that made him successful at the Marquee. Jeff Hotel, Cream, Fleetwood Mac, Hendrix, Genesis,
wow.
Led Zeppelin, yes. The list goes on. The Police, Jam, Duran Duran got signed there. The Pretenders, Slade, Quo, the Pistols got banned, their first ever gig there. AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Meridian. It goes on through the 60s, 70s and 80s. And of course, people wanted to go on that stage that had that stardust where the Rolling Stones first played, The Who, Hendrix, Floyd. So it created its own momentum.
Now, of course, it's not just British acts that were on there. Some of the American acts that came over, like, say, for instance, Guns N' Roses, who were, although known on the LA scene, they weren't really known in America until they came over to the UK. And they did like those old blues artists did.
Oh, no, totally. I mean, it must have been a desperately disappointing thing to arrive at this Hello Club and realise it was dark and sweaty and dingy and sticky floors, as Lemmy once said. That's just what a rock and roll venue should be like. But it certainly probably was a bit of an anticlimax. But yes, you had Simon and Garfunkel, obviously from Ireland, U2, Boomtown Rats played their first gigs in London there. You had AC/DC coming over from Australia. REM played their first gig outside of the US there, the Bangles, Bryan Adams. But yeah, probably most interestingly, Guns N' Roses played 3 nights at the Marquee. And actually the first chapter of the book we've written talks about that Guns N' Roses 3-nighter. And probably the story I like best is Metallica, who played their first gigs outside the US, and they famously did a sales fee outside of the venue. They appeared along with a number of acts coming to try and break the UK, and the tour got cancelled. They stayed around and famously waited 3 nights and then appeared at the Marquee. And those 3 nights, they went out drinking with Lemmy on night 1, and I think they regretted that. Night 2. They went shopping in Oxford Street and got arrested, thinking they were carrying drugs, but it was actually a bit of flu congestion for one of the band. And night 3, bizarrely, they went to Walthamstow to a gig and started leafleting, worried that no one would turn up for their gig at the Marquee.
Oh, wow, what a story. What a story. And here these bands are now, filling stadiums around the world. Just incredible, isn't it?
Everyone's got to start somewhere, haven't they? That's the interesting thing. I mean, I like some of the quirky stories. So, for example, Dire Straits played one night, and it was a typically hot and sweaty night, and Mark Knopfler put a sweatband on his head for the first time, and I don't think he ever took it off after that night. So he sort of
trademark
that famous headburn at the club. You also got Ozzy Osbourne first met Sharon Osbourne, his wife, at the club. You actually got the Police first met Andy Summers at the club, and he joined them on the stage, and that's what created the magic of that trio.
Yeah.
Mick Ronson met David Bowie at the club and joined the band the day after, and became the Spiders from Mars pretty quickly, and Ziggy Stardust. So it was a place where a lot of people met each other, as well as got signed.
And of course, it was one of those places where if you wanted to play somewhere, you had to play there. And also, the people that went there became very, I don't know, was it critical or very choosy about the acts and how they reacted to them? You had to be good to make it on that stage, didn't you?
Well, Giorgio Gomelski had a good quote, who was the first manager of the Stones and a big friend of my parents, and based in our offices, and he met the Stones there along with Nicky Hopkins, who played that brilliant piano on so many of the Stones hits. And he would say it was like a musical gym, because effectively they had these residencies where they tried to build a following, and they got fit themselves on stage. And I think famously Keith Emerson, who later became Emerson, Lake and Palmer, started off playing keyboards for the Nice there. Interestingly, part of his act was using daggers to play the piano, and those were daggers lent to him by the roadie at the time, which was a certain Lemmy. He started off as a standard sort of blues band, but by the end they defined their sort of famous sort of prog rock sound. So you also actually found your own unique sound by those residencies. Sadly, bands don't get the opportunity to hone their craft over such a consistent period of time. And of course, what they learned was the same audience would be coming back each week. So they thought, well, we better learn some new songs.
Yes.
And we better do something better and top what we did the week before. So yeah, it was a real forcing factor to get your act together.
Now, venues like the Marquee, sadly, no longer exist. And I personally think it's terrible, because bands never get that chance to face a public that close and play their music. Yeah, okay, there are festivals, but there's nowhere like it, is there?
No, but I mean, of course, the legacy is that what we called as the Marquee's Garden Party is the Reading Festival. So we started that in Richmond 3 years after the Marquee started, and that provided almost a staircase for bands to be exposed to a wider audience. So what my dad liked the most, we're always focusing on what's next, but having a band playing support at the Marquee, whether it was bizarrely Slade paid support to Yes, Tubeway Army played support to a band no one's ever heard of anymore. So playing support, then headlining the Marquee, then getting a residency, then perhaps appearing at the festival lower down the order till eventually they would headline the festival. So it created a ladder that people could climb and also learn their craft.
Yeah.
Also, we had recording studios, so we would record some of those artists, but also other artists. Famously, the Moody Blues, the first song that was recorded at the studios was the Moody Blues Go Now, which became a huge number one hit, probably one of the last ones. And this shows the variety at the Marquee. One of the last ones was Dead or Alive, You Turn Me Right Round, which became the foundation for Stock Aitken and Waterman's hit factory. And between that, you had people like the Wombles recorded tracks at the Marquee, Elton John, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, Chelsea's Blue Is the Colour, Toyah, Monty Python recorded their first comedy album at the Marquee that obviously then helped them break America. So I particularly like this. There's something for everyone in the Marquee story, and whether it's a recording studio, whether it's a story of the festivals, whether it's the story of the club. But yeah, how artists actually learn their craft and get feedback is very different nowadays.
The book itself, you must have done so much research to have been able to write it. I mean, obviously, being a family member, you know some of the history, but to find out so many different stories about the Marquee, I bet that was quite fascinating, actually, wasn't it?
I mean, it was. I mean, so many people had been asking my dad to write down the story, and he was, as an entrepreneur, he was always interested in looking forward, and very modest and sort of dismissive of what the Marquee and the Reading and the recording studios had achieved. Luckily, he passed away in 2017, but just before that, I realised, well, maybe I'd better try and do it. So I got approached by Robert Sellers, who's my co-author, who's written a number of books. We had a lot of people who started books, but I think they were a bit too close to the subject, so they almost got overwhelmed by it. But Robert saw an opportunity. We spent quite a lot of time interviewing my dad, so we got quite a lot of his memories. And then I talked to the people involved in running the club and the managers, and Robert talked to some of the bands and the audience members. We brought it together. It took about 5 years overall, and it was way too long, so it was probably longer than Lord of the Rings, because everyone we spoke to said, oh, you have to talk to this band, or this band, this is how we met this person, and you almost think it's an oral history that you need to try and capture. But of course, it needs to also be quite accessible and readable. So, and interestingly, our publisher said, well, it has to be a certain size, and I was saying, why? And he said, well, Nick, so it actually fits through people's letterboxes, because of course most books are bought online now, and the weight's not too much for it to be delivered by post. So the editing process was quite brutal. We got there in the end. I'm very pleased with the quality of the book, and Paradise Road has been a very supportive publisher. But yeah, I learned so many things on that 5-year journey. I'm still learning more now, actually. People are telling me things all the time, so maybe I need to add a volume 2 or a revision to it, because so many stories.
So the book's called Marquee, the story of the world's greatest music venue. As you say, it's available on Paradise Road?
Paradise Road on their website. That's the publisher. They do many other good books as well, so you can find some others there. And I guess if you Google it, it's probably, I think we'd sold out on Amazon, but you can always try Amazon. It's just about, it's selling really well, so there might
Excellent.
be a limited chance to get the first edition,
Yes.
but I guess it's going to be republished soon.
And it's the sort of thing you could really look forward to receiving on Christmas Day.
Well, I'm biased, but I guess anyone I think music is such an important part of our memory, and culture is what almost makes us feel alive. And I hope for many people they can read this and be inspired, or remember a time and a place where they first heard or discovered an artist, an act, and almost once you discover it before they become famous, you have that special feeling. You almost feel some ownership of it, and hopefully some of these stories, whether you've been to the Marquee or not, for any bands you might like, hearing how they started or how they got signed, how they experimented, or indeed reliving one of your own experiences, hopefully that will be enjoyable for anyone who chooses to read the book.
All right. Nick, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And always for your words. Fascinating. Get a copy.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Take care now and be safe. We'll see you soon, hopefully.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.